Hi everyone and welcome to a new video on the CVI channel. In this tutorial series we're creating a full stack web application using Python Django in the backend and React JS in the front end. This is not the first video in this series, in fact we've already done 13 before in which we've discussed various topics. This video follows a little bit later and it's going to focus on using multi-select fields in Python Django and React JS, and we're going to be implementing that by following 7 steps. We're going to start by making some changes to our models.py file, and then we're going to migrate those models and check out the results in our database. Next, we're going to be making some changes to our serializers, our views, and our URLs so that everything inside of our backend is arranged for the multi-select field. Then we're going to move over to our React.js frontend, and we're going to get a multi-select form from Material UI and add that to our project. We're then going to customize the form so that it can be used by React Hook form, because that's what we will be using inside of our front-end application. And we're going to be changing our create and edit pages so it can use the multi-select form. As the last step, we're going to test and make sure that everything works the way that we expect. So we are now in our code, and the first thing that we're going to do is make some changes to our backend. And inside of the backend, we're going to go to the API and then to our models.py file, because the first thing that I want to do is create a different model for the options for our multi-select field. So I'm going to copy over this class right here, and we're going to create a new model called employees, because we're going to add a new multiple choice field where we can allocate multiple employees to one project. Now I'm not going to make any changes to this because it's okay for them to have a name, a created and a modified attribute. So it's fine like this. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a new field to our project model, and in there we want to allocate multiple employees to multiple projects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to state that in there I'm going to create a new field called employees, and this field is going to be a models.many-to-many field, because many of our projects can have many of the employees. And we're going to reference which model we want to use for our many-to-many field, and that is going to be employees. And by specifying this attribute, our database now knows that we are going to be expecting multiple entries coming from the employees model. So we're going to save our changes in our models.py file, and I'm going to make one small change to our admin.py file right here, because I want to register my employees model right there so that we can go into our admin site and make some changes to those models. So now that our models have been successfully modified, we're going to make the migrations and migrate the model so that it's also reflected inside of our database. And to do that, I'm first going to go to my terminal and cd into our backend, and then use venv/scripts/activate to activate our virtual environment. And then we can do python manage.py make migrations. And then we're going to do python manage.py migrate. And everything seems to be successful. So now let's start our server by doing python manage.py run server, so we can go to the admin portal and check out the results. So we have successfully started our server, and now let's go to /admin so that we can log into the admin portal. And we can log in by using user1 as our username and testing321 as the password, because we've already created in previous videos. And now by listing it in our admin.py file, you can see that we have a new model called employees. Now the first thing that I'm going to do here is create a number of employees so we can use that inside of our front end. So I'm going to create an employee with the name employee1, and we're going to save and add another for employee2, save and add another for employee3, and then do save and add another for employee4 as well. So now that we have some entries inside of our database, so we can make sure that we can use these as the different options. Now, if we now go to our projects model, you will see that if we create a new project, a new field should have been added right here called employees, which enables us to select multiple employees. Now, if we go to the graphical user interface of our database and we go to the same project model, you will not actually see the field employees right here. As a matter of fact, instead of adding another field inside of the project model, you will see that it has created another table called API project underscore employees. And in there, it captures the ID of the row, the ID of the project model that we have right here, and the ID of the employee. And what they call this is a bridge table, and it actually bridges the gap between our project model and our employees model by notifying the IDs inside of a separate table. Now, the reason that it does this is that multiple projects can have multiple employees, and by listing these down in a separate table, it becomes a little bit more efficient. Now we can see inside of our Django backend that we can still refer to the employees field, because as far as Django is concerned, this field still exists. So we can still write and get data from employees to make sure that we get this inside of our frontend. So it is nice that we have now created an employees model and that we have a field called employees in our project model, but we still need to make sure that we can get the fields for employees to our backend and our frontend by changing the serializer. And we also need to create a new API that can bring our employees to the frontend. So let's do that right now. So first things first, we're going to go to our serializers.py file. And inside of our project serializer, we're going to add the field called employees, so that our serializer knows that it can expect that field when we request data or when we post it. Next to that, we can also create a view, a URL, and a serializer for our employees model. So for the serializer, I can just copy over the project manager serializer, and we're just going to change that and call it the employees serializer. And then we can change the model to employees, and the name and the ID is actually the information that we want to bring from our backend to our frontend. So that is all good. What we also need is a view. And in this case, we need to create a view set with a function of list, because we only want to retrieve a list of all of our employees. So I'm going to copy over this part from our project view set, and I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to call it my employees view set. And in there, we need to make a few changes. We can change the query set to employees.objects.all, and we can change the serializer to our employees serializer. And let's just delete this last part. And then same goes here. We need to change project.objects.all into employees.objects.all. And for the rest, this is all good. Now, the last thing we need to bring this data to our frontend is also to give it a URL. So in our urls.py file, we're going to copy over one of these routes. And we're going to change this to employees. We're going to say that it refers to our employee view set. And we will give it a base name of employees as well. And by making these changes, we actually finished up all of the work for our backend, because we've now enabled our serializer to state that we want to have the employees field included inside of the serializer, because we want to bring the data from the front end to the backend. And in addition to that, we have also made sure that we can use the employees URL to get all of the employees from our database. So now let's move on to our front end and get started over there. Now, the first thing that we're going to do inside of our React.js frontend is create a new form component that can handle a multi-select field. Because you can see that we already have a mySelect field from Material UI, but this one can only handle single selections. So we now need to find one that can handle multi-select. So to do that, we're going to go to the Material UI documentation, and on the left-hand side, we're going to go to Components. And at some point we encounter select. Now on the top here you can find basic select statements, but if we scroll down a little bit more, at some point we will arrive at multi-select like this. And there are a few different options that we can take. We have a default version that works like this, which separates it by a comma. We also have a version with the check marks, but the version that I like the most is the one with the chips, because this one will create a nice looking chip inside of our form after we have selected the people in this form. So this is the one that we are going to be using inside of our project. So what we will do is we're going to show code, and we're going to copy over the full code of this form. Then we're going to go back to our React.js code, and inside of the forms folder, I'm going to create a new form called my multi-select field.jsx. And in there, we're going to paste the full code of the multi-select field, and we can make some changes to make sure that it will work with React hook form. Now, the first thing we need to do is do an import, because what you already saw in our previous forms is that we need to import controller from React hook form to make sure that our form can work with control inputs from React hook form. Otherwise, it will simply not go well. The next thing that we are going to change, we're going to delete the constant of names, because we don't want to use these options inside of our form, but want to pass in our own options. So this one can completely go. What we're also going to change is the name of the form, because I want to call it my multi-select field, like this. And in addition to that, we also want to pass in some props, because if you remember from the previous videos, we want to make these forms reusable and dynamic. And to do that, we can pass in certain props in certain places, so we can define the value later and use this form multiple times. But to do that, I also need to define a constant right here. And in here, I'm going to define all of the different props that I want to use. Now, the first thing I want to use is control, because that's what we need to make sure the component is controlled. We're also going to be using name, label, and options. And that is going to be equal to the name of props. And now all of these things right here are passed in for this. And now we can use this to make sure that the fields represent a certain value. Now we don't actually need to change the handle change, because this already works the way that it should. Inside of our input label, we're going to put in the first prop, because we want to define the label ourselves like this. So if we do it like this, we can pass in our name of the form through the props that we've linked in right there. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to wrap this entire select field in the controller component, similarly as what we've done before in the my select field. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to copy over this controller piece from our my select field, and we're just going to make sure that it does exactly the same thing, but then for our multi-select field. So after our div right here, we can put in the whole thing of the controller, and we're going to make an indentation of this whole form control stuff right there. And then we can also copy over the ending of this entire thing, which is this, and this. So if we now paste it in after this form control, it should be complete. So inside of the controller, the name and the control and also the render components can remain exactly the same. We just need to make some small changes inside of our select field. Now, the first thing that we need to change is we need to set value equal to value, because that is going to be controlled from here. Next, we need to slightly change our own change statement. And we're going to just delete the handle change and make it a little bit bigger. And inside of there, we're going to start with some round brackets and then an E. And then we're going to do an arrow function like this. And inside of the arrow function, we are going to put some squirrely brackets. And in there, we state that handle change needs to be equal to E. And then we also want to do on change e.target.value. Now what this does, it is going to combine the best of both worlds. It is going to be using the onChange statement from our controller to make sure that whenever something changes in the form, it is reflected by taking our target value. And it's also going to make sure that the handle change function is triggered, which is going to make sure that the person names, or in this case, our options, are being displayed correctly inside of our forms. And that is going to be very helpful for us, because now it's going to work just fine. Now, the last things that we need to make changes to is the options, because we just deleted the list of the names because we want to pass in our own options that we've mentioned right here inside of this select field. Now, the first place where we need to make this change is right here, because this is going to be the drop-down menu that is going to present us with all of the different options. Now, you already saw it above here, but our options is going to be called options. So if we scroll down, we can simply say here that we want to have options.map, and then we're going to call every item in there equal to option. Now, important here is that we need to set the key and the value, and then also pass it in as the style. Now, what I actually want is I want the key to be the option.id, and I want the value also to be the option.id. But in the styling, so in the actual chips that we're going to present on the screen, I would like to see the name. So in there, we will do option.name. And also the value we want to see inside of these menu items is also going to be the name, because we want the users to see the name, but send the value back to the database. And to change that, we can do option.name as well. And just like this, the drop-down list should display our options that we pass in through the options prop. Now you might wonder, why do we set the key and the value to the IDs instead of just using the names? Well, to explain that, we can go to our project endpoint inside of our backend browser. And if I click on that, you can see right here that we can create a new project. So if I just say my new project like this, and I can select a project manager and also a start date of today and an end date of tomorrow, then add some comments, and as a status I will do open. And if I now select 2 employees like this, we can post this and see what the actual output is that is being put here on the screen. Because that output that is on the screen right here is also the output that we need to send through our front end to our backend, and then it will be accepted. So if I post this right here, you can see that for the employees field, it expects an array with the IDs of the employee included. And that is the reason that inside of our multi-select field, we want the values to be equal to the ID, because our Django backend wants to have the ID inside of the database. Now, of course, for the users, the ID is not going to make sense. And that is why we want still in the chips to display the option.name and also the option.name in the field name, of course. Now, there's one more thing that we need to change inside of this form, and that is actually the determination of how it is being rendered. Because inside of the render value, we can see what is being selected or not. And we need to make a small change there. So things that are selected can still be named selected. So it's going to be selected.map and then do the value. And then inside of the little chips, which in the examples are actually these gray boxes, it is going to display the key as the value and also the label as the value. But what we've already just discussed, we don't actually want the value as a label, because that is just going to show a number, and that is not going to be interesting for the user. We actually want to have the name in there. Now, to do that, we can go back to our options and look up the right name that belongs to the value, because instead of a chip, we will only have the value. So to change this, we can change the value by doing options.find, and in there we specify option and then an arrow is going to be option.id is equal to our value, and then we're going to do question mark and then dot name. Now what does this actually do? Well, in our chip we have the value, and the value is equal to the ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the different options inside of our list. We're going to find the option where the option ID, so the ID inside of our options list, is going to be equal to this ID value, which should then find the right option. And if we have found a match, which is what the question mark does, then we want to display the dot name. And this is going to make sure that we have the name inside of our chip field and not the number. So let's save it. And this should be all that we need to do to customize our multi-select field. So now let's go to our create.jsx page and actually implement it inside of there so we can see the end result. And it actually turned out that we need to make one small little change to our multi-select field. Be sure that inside of the controller you also specify a default value, and between these squarely brackets, just leave an empty array with some square brackets, because the default value needs to be an array, otherwise it will not work. So right now in our create.js field, we have a text field, a date picker and a date picker, and then a multi-line field, a select field and a select field. And then we have one row that currently just has the submit button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this box right here, and I'm going to just put another box underneath our latest for box because I want things to be the same, and then we can kind of see what it looks like. And inside of that box, we are going to put in our new form. But before we can do that, we actually need to import that form. So on the top of the screen, we're going to do import my multi-select field like this. And now we can use this to put our select field on the screen. Now, similarly to the different other fields, we need to provide some props because those are the props that we've also just listed right here. We need to input a name, control, label, and options. So let's do that right here. So we can just copy these things over from our other select field because they're basically the same. Now our label is going to be called employees because we want to allocate employees to our field. And we're also going to change the technical name to employees because this is the field name that we have in our database. Now in control, we can put in control, and we can also just set this width to 30%, which is fine. And then as an options, I'm right now going to use project manager because that's the one we already defined. But in a minute, we are going to change this and make sure that we can use the employees. Let's first see how this looks inside of our frontend. So I'm going to save it and I'm going to start my server, and I will be right back with the results. So we are now inside of our front end, and when we go to our application and go to create, we will see our new form right here called employees. Now if we go on the drop down, you can see that we can select the multiple options right here, and we can also unselect them by clicking them again. So that works the way that we expect. Now, the only thing that I want to change for now is create a little bit more of a margin on the top. Make sure that the employees right here is not going through the line, and that its width is the same as the other fields. So let's make that change and go back. So you can see that inside of our my select field, we actually use width as a parameter right here, and we pass that inside of the form control. So we're going to do the same thing in our multi-select field, where on the top we're going to add width like this, and then we're just going to copy over the statement of the width, go to the multi-select field, and then in the same place in the form control, make sure that it is right there as well. And we also need to delete the divs that are in our return statement because those are actually limiting our width as well. So let's check what we see in the front end now. And if we now go back, it looks absolutely fine. The only thing that we would like to change is the margin on the top and the stripe right here through the text. So let's start by fixing the margin by going to our create page, and inside of the box we're just going to state that we want to have a margin top, and let's give ourselves 20 pixels of additional space, and let's see what it looks like right now. And actually looking at it, we can make it a little bit more. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to make it 40 like this, and now you can see that we have a little bit more room for our form. And for now, this is completely fine for me. Now, the thing that we currently need to change is make sure that this field actually displays the options that we have defined inside of our front end, and also that we add the employees field to the full submission process. So let's do that right now. So inside of our create.jsx file right here, we are going to make some changes. Now, the first thing that we're going to change is the schema, because in here we need to make sure that the employees field is added. Now this works a little bit differently than the previous ones because this is not a string or an integer field. We actually need to use yup.array like this. And to make sure that it is not empty, so that is required, we can add a .min and specify 1 in there. And after that, we can state what text we want to display in case we do not do that. And we can say pick at least one option from the select field. And this is going to make sure that it is validated in a correct manner, because we can't use string or any other things. It needs to be an array specifically. The next things that we need to change is the submission, because we have of course added a field to that, and that field is employees, and that is going to be equal to data.employees. And if we scroll a little bit further to the top, you can see a statement right here, which actually loads the project manager data and puts it inside of our application. Now we need to make this exact same call, but then we also need to get our employees so that we can use those as the options inside of our form field. So what I'm going to do is just literally copy over what we already had, like this, and paste it in right here. And now we're going to make that request, but we're not going to get project manager, but we're going to get employees. Because if we go to our backend, to our API, and then to our URLs, that is where it is actually located. Now, currently it is pointing towards set project manager, and that is not what we want, because we want to have an own constant for the employees. So we're going to copy that over and define a constant of employees and use set employees in there. And now we can change this set project manager, which is going to put the data inside of there, and change it to set employees, so that the employees variable is going to be the one receiving the data. Now we can of course console.log the data for now, that's completely fine, and we have set loading to false. Now I'm going to disable this set loading to false, because we only want to set the loading to false after this second item has also been loaded. And like this, it should also get our employees data. And if we now use employees inside of the options of our multi-select form, it should work. So let's see if that is the case. So in here, we specify employees like this. And let's go to our front end and see if we now have a different list popping up. And if we now go to the front end, you can indeed see that our employees have now successfully been loaded. So this is working exactly the way that we would expect, which is nice. And another thing we can also change is the outline going through the label. And that is actually because we need to place label also in the label here in the outlined input. So here we're going to make a change from chip to the label. And now when we go back and we do this, it fits in there nicely. So this is working just fine. Okay, so almost all the changes that we have made to our created.js file are now complete, because we have created the form, have the right input as the options, and we have also made sure that it is handled in the submission. Now, before we're actually going to submit anything, I just want to do a test run and see what the output is to check whether it matches what Django is going to be expecting. So I'm going to just copy out this entire Axios instance.post statement, and for now we're just going to console.log the data, and I'm going to say that submission is going to be equal to the data. And now when we press the submit button with the form filled in, we should be able to see what is going to be submitted to our backend. So let's now enter some information. So say project 123. We can put in a start date and an end date. We can do some comments in here and also a status and a project manager. And let's select employee 3 and employee 4 and see what happens inside of our console. So we're going to click on inspect and then click the submit button, and let's see what happens. Okay, so we now have our submission right here. And when we open it up, you can indeed see that employees is currently displayed in an array which have a 3 and a 4. So this should mean that when we submit the data, everything goes the way that we expect. So now let's just try it for real. So I'm going to do Control Z 2 or 3 times so that we are back where we were before. And we're going to submit this to our backend, and hopefully we will see a new entry inside of our database. Alright, so we have here the same information. I'm now going to click submit, and hopefully we will see it inside of our database. Okay, so we have been navigated to our home page, which is good. And now let's check the project table to see if we have a new entry. And you can see on the bottom right here that we have a new entry for project 123 also with all of the information that I've entered. And the main question is, do we also see the information in the employees bridge table? So we're going to go to the table API project underscore employees. And in here, you will indeed see that we have an entry, because the project we have just created is the 24 project, and we now have the 3 and the 4 right here. And these other two results were from the earlier exercise where we used the browser API to do the tests. So this seems to be working good. So the last thing to make this complete is that we also need to make sure that we pass this information back to our edit page, so we can also make changes to this information inside of our page. So to do that, we're going to modify the edit page as well. And first thing that I'm going to do on my create page is just copy over some of the things. I'm going to copy over the multi-select field in this instance, because we're going to use exactly the same in our edit page. So in our edit page, we're going to go down to the form part. And after the last form, we're going to put in the multi-select field, like we did before. And we, of course, also need to then copy over the import of the multi-select field, otherwise it will not work. And we also need to make sure that we get the employees data, so we can pass that to our form, and we can actually edit the values. So back to our create page, and we're just going to copy over the Axios instance that gets those employees. And we put it right below here. And then we, of course, also need to change this. So we're going to also copy over the constant of the employees so that we have that ready there as well. And we can get rid of the set loading. And we can then also change the set value here, because this is going to determine the initial or the default value of our form when it loads on the page. And we can say that the value of the employees field needs to be equal to res.data.employees. And this should pass in the right information into our form so that we can then edit it if we would like to. Now, for the rest, we also need to change this submission part, because here we want to also add employees and make sure that it's equal to data.employees. And I think that is all that we need to change at this moment. And we also need to delete this last bracket, otherwise the code will not compile successfully, because I made a small typo. And let's now see what our front end looks like after it has successfully reloaded. All right, and we're now inside of our front end, and to get the latest project that we have just created, we need to go actually to the next page or extend the number of projects you see. And here we can see that we have our project 123 that we have just created. So if I now click on edit, we should go to the page where we can see the form with all of the values. And you can indeed see that if we go to the edit page, it automatically passes in the right information inside of our employees form. And we can now revise this, and hopefully the changes will be reflected correctly inside of our database. So currently we have selected employee 3 and 4, which also have the IDs of 3 and 4. So now let's get rid of employee 3 and add employee 1 and save this. And let's see if we get the right output inside of our database. All right, so the submission has gone smoothly. And if I now go to our database and I refresh the information, you can see that we now have the employee 4 and employee 1 inside of our database. So that seems to be working just fine. And that is actually all for today. In this video, I showed you how you can add a multi-select field to your Django and React application. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.